Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be doing a review for the channel read-along for the month of February, which was Bloodsong by Anthony Ryan. This is a book that I, according to Goodreads, tabbed to read about a year ago, and I know that it was one of the first books that I picked up on when I joined BookTube. So it was a book that I had heard a lot of booktubers talking about and recommending, and ever since then I really wanted to check it out. And so we picked it for the channel read-along for February, and I had a great time reading it and discussing it with everybody on the channel, and found that there was probably more of a variation of experiences than I was thinking there would be. For anybody who has not heard of Bloodsong, this is the first book in Anthony Ryan's series called The Raven Shadow. This is a trilogy. I don't remember when it came out because I forgot to look it up before this, but it's a few years old. And like I said, is one of those titles that gets a lot of buzz on BookTube. And kind of the common explanation that I hear on BookTube is that the first book, Bloodsong, is phenomenal and that there is a drop in quality after that. So people tend to not like the subsequent entries in the trilogy as much as the first, but the first one acts as a standalone. So I thought that I would pick it up as a standalone and go into it from there. I can confirm after reading this book that it does function well as a standalone. There are definitely, all of the plot threads from the main book are tied up, but there are still underlying enemies and underlying ideas and underlying mysteries that pertain to the world that if you really enjoy the story, I'm sure that you would enjoy going on to book 2 and 3 to find out some of the answers to those questions. For a very brief introduction to Bloodsong, this is a very classic fantasy tale that centers around the life story of our main character, whose name is Valen Al-Sorna. So Valen is the primary character in this book, and I think this book gets a lot of comparisons to The Name of the Wind, which is a book that I actually don't think it has that much in common with, except for the narrative structure. So at the beginning of the story, we have Valen, who is regaling the tales of his life to a chronicler. And this chronicler has taken note of the history of Valen's realm and the countries and lands that lie beyond it. And Valen starts to talk to him and say, I've read some of your stuff and you actually get a lot of it wrong. And this man, who has no love for our main character whatsoever, is kind of begrudgingly intrigued because although he has so much hatred for Valen for reasons that will become clear throughout the narrative, he's also a historian and he really wants to know this story that Valen has to tell. So we get Valen's story unfolding over the course of the novel, which is meant to clear up some inconsistencies in the historical record. And because this is a very similar setup to The Name of the Wind, where we have Kvothe, who has, become notorious, who has had both epic accomplishments and huge downfalls, starts to chronicle his story over the course of 3 days, then I think that's where we get those parallels. However, in terms of the type of story that it is, the type of language that is used, the type of characters that both of these people are, they're very, very different. So if you like The Name of the Wind because of that narrative setup and you like your books structured that way, then I would say yes, this is a good comparison. But if what you like about The Name of the Wind is the lyricism in the writing, the underlying mystery, the way that the story actually unfolds, they're not that similar. In Valen, our main character in Bloodsong, we start to follow him as a young boy when he is being brought to a brotherhood, which is called the Sixth Order. So in his land, which is just called the Realm, which is a monarchy, it is ruled over by a king who has a warlord and then various governors. There's also a setup, or I guess a governing body for the faith. And again, it's just called the Faith. And this is really the backbone of the country. This is how the king relates to the common people. The faith is very important to all of his countrymen. And in order to spread the word of the faith, to protect the realm from anything that should want to harm or go against the faith, we have the 6 orders. And all of the different orders serve various purposes. There's a healing order. There is an order that is kind of more scholarly in nature. And then the order that we are primarily following in this book is the sixth order, which is kind of your battle school. So at the very beginning of this story, Valen is brought to this battle school, this training facility for young men who are going to join the sixth order. And that's really all you need to know. I don't need to give you any more setup than that. And I think that even knowing that much can give you some insight into why this book is so popular. I really and truly think that the reason that Bloodsong has had such appeal to such a wide range of viewers, or readers, is that it deals with fantasy tropes that we tend to like a lot. It has the battle school. There are really strong relationships between Valen and the various members of his training class. We get to follow a young man over the course of his life as he builds up skills, as he gains confidence, as he becomes, the heroic figure that we're always wanting to see in fantasy. And I think, I truly do think that's what endears so many people to this book. I guess the big question, knowing that we're going into this setup, knowing that these are tropes that I personally really like, did I love this book? So the answer is no. I did not like it. I did not love it. I liked Bloodsong. I have to admit, I thought that it was a really solid fantasy novel. Unfortunately, I think part of what maybe hindered my enjoyment a little bit is that I went into this with really high expectations. And I try not to do that too often, but this just seemed to have so many of the things that I really love. I really love coming of age stories. We start to follow Valen when he is a young man, and we follow him through to adulthood. I really love that narrative device, that narrative structure of telling your life story after the fact, once you know that some event has happened, because I like the way that the tension builds. I like figuring out how our character went from, this 10-year-old boy to this, disillusioned adult. I really like the battle school setup. I really like strong friendships in family or in fantasy. And there are some other elements that I personally enjoy that I will talk about in a couple of minutes. But I just felt like this was the perfect concoction. This was the perfect mixture of tropes and archetypes that should have really appealed to me. And although I did like it, I think that's as far as it's going to go. It was a solid book that did certain tropes and archetypes that I like really well, but there was nothing for me that elevated it beyond just being a good book. There was no one part of the story that for me was particularly standout. When something is going to be a favorite, I want to either be extremely invested in the main character. I want to either fall in love with the prose. I want there to be some, flipping of tropes or some narrative device that's very clever or feels very unique. And in Bloodsong, I didn't feel like I got any of those things. I think that each of those elements was solidly done. I don't have any complaints about Bloodsong. I think that the pacing was fair. I think that the characterization was good. I think that the world building was interesting. I thought that the magic system was neat. I thought that the way that the plot unfolded was worth following, but there was no one or any or several elements that really elevated it beyond just a good book for me. And so I suppose I could look at that as a little bit of a disappointment because I thought that this was like a slam dunk 5 stars, when really I think for me this probably falls more in like the 3.5 to 4 star range. That being said, I think that this is a really easy book to recommend because the tropes that it uses have such wide appeal. These are really common tropes for people to like, and Valen is an easy main character to get behind. I think that Anthony Ryan does a really good job of really treading the balance between a character who seems a little bit, who I think could easily be interpreted as a Mary Sue, but I think that there is enough in Valen, there is enough conflict within him, there is enough trouble that he has to go through. He grapples with his beliefs, he grapples with his decisions enough for him to feel more fully developed. That being said, he definitely does swing toward the side of, good. I don't think that there's a lot of moral ambiguity in Valen. I think that he is a good person. And that's okay with me as well. I like following characters who are fundamentally good people, but Valen to me feels more like a Corbin from Faithful and the Fallen than, a more nuanced or more, like I said, more morally ambiguous main character. I think that we know that he is the good guy that we are supposed to be rooting for. And even those circumstances in this novel do put him into positions where he has to really struggle against his beliefs and where he has to carry out acts that are less than moral, that are less than righteous. I think that we always know that that kind of kernel of his soul is good. And so if you like that in your fantasy characters, then I think that you would probably really like this book. In terms of the prose, as I said, I didn't have any difficulties. I didn't have any problems with the prose in this novel. For me, this was kind of the epitome of prose as a vehicle for your story. There was nothing about Anthony Ryan's prose that stood out in one direction or the other. There are some styles of writing that I find very difficult to lose myself in or to immerse myself in. And that's usually when there's an overemphasis on characters thinking out their decisions. And so we have to follow this thought process. And sometimes it feels like being spoon-fed, which is one of the issues that I had when I was reading Brandon Sanderson's novels. I felt like there was a little bit of over-explanation in terms of character motivation. I did not get that here. I thought that this was the perfect prose to let you enjoy the story without taking you out or hindering your enjoyment in any way. On the flip side, I don't think that there's anything spectacular about the prose. I don't think that it's particularly beautiful. I wasn't ever stopping to marvel over the way that Anthony Ryan uses the written word, but it felt perfectly perfunctory. Like it performed its function very well, and it made it so that I didn't ever have to feel like I was being taken out of the story, which was really good. And I think that works well in stories like this in heroic fantasy because we want to know about the underlying mystery. We want to know about the battle scenes. We want to figure out more about the characters. And, it wasn't all about the prose in this case, which was fine. Character-wise, because this is a narrative that tells us the story of somebody's life, most of the character development does come from Valen in terms of watching characters grapple, like I said, with their morals, with their belief system, having to make difficult decisions and being put in situations where they have to sometimes go against what they believe in. Valen is really the only character that we get a lot of that from. There are some very prominent secondary characters. There is in particular one group of friends that Valen has as he works his way through the Sixth Order. And his main group of friends is a group of, 4 or 5 other boys. And to be honest, there were 2 of them that felt more distinctive to me. They had more intricate backstories. We were able to see a little bit further into their heads. We were able to understand that they were also grappling with some of the same issues as Valen and some different things than Valen. They were not just kind of copy paste of his personality, but like watered down, which you can sometimes find in fantasy. It's like, you have your protagonist and then your protagonist light. I didn't feel like that. I felt like Valen's friends felt very individual. But for some of them, I just thought, okay, well, this is rich friend, this is strong friend, this is sad friend, and this is pickpocket friend. It took a long time for them to develop their own personalities. And even then, there were only, like I said, 1 or 2 of them that really stood out in my mind. And that probably had more to do with plot developments, because there are a couple of them that feature more heavily in certain plot exploration than others, and less to do with Anthony Ryan's ability to really flesh out his characters. So I would say in terms of character work, it wasn't bad. I didn't feel like these were one-dimensional. I didn't feel like they were cardboard cutouts, but they were very classic high fantasy characters. And if that is what you're looking for, then that's great. But if you're looking for something that has a little more nuance, then this might not be the book for you. Other than that, the world building is kind of the last thing that I want to check in on. Again, solid world building. Like I said, we kind of have that push and pull between the monarchy and the ruling class and then the church, which also I think gives us a little bit of insight into the socioeconomic status of the realm, because in the monarchy we obviously have all of the aristocrats. I like the aristocrats, but these ones are aristocrats. So between the aristocrats, which is the ruling class, and then the vast majority of people who make up the orders actually come from the common folk. They can be from, aristocratic families who want to display their loyalty to the church, but for lots of them, they just come from, other walks of life. They're basically for kids that don't have any other option. If you are poor, if you're on the streets, if you need somewhere to go where you're going to get a decent meal and that you're going to have a roof over your head, then why don't you go join one of the orders? So it does highlight some of those discrepancies, and I think that Anthony Ryan does try to give us some insight into the economic status of the realm and some of the discord between the common folk and the ruling class. But because there's a lot going on in this story, we touch on those issues, but we don't ever really explore them fully. Same thing goes with political intrigue from the perspective of our rulers and then our main character, Valen. Valen often finds himself as, many a chosen one or many a fantasy protagonist in the middle of much intrigue. And this is coming at him from various sides. And because there are so many different threads that are kind of culminating near the end of this novel, we don't spend an incredible amount of time on any of them. And I think that's probably because, this is a trilogy and we're going to figure out more about these mysteries as we move on through the books. But if you're treating it as a standalone and you don't plan to go on and read the other books, it might feel a little bit underwhelming in terms of the scope of the political intrigue or how those things are handled. After all that, I feel like I have given the impression that I didn't like the book, but I did. Again, like I said, this was a very solid fantasy read. I think it is. My friend Andrew from Andrew's Wizardly Reads described Anthony Ryan as kind of the modern evolution of David Gemmell. And I can really see where he's coming from with that, because I think that this is a modern take on fantasy. It does explore more about, mental health and that conflict than a lot of your typical classic fantasy does. But it does feel very classic in execution in terms of, if you think of your heroic fantasy and the common tropes and plot devices that are used in that, you can see a lot of that Anthony Ryan has taken a lot of inspiration from that heroic fantasy that came before him. And I really like heroic fantasy. I like classic fantasy. And to me, this just felt like a very cozy book. It was fun to read. I liked Valen. I liked the elements of the story that came together. But I don't know how long I'll remember all of those things. I don't know how long his friends' names will stick in my mind. I don't know how much I'm going to think about this book once I've closed it and put it aside. I do think I will go on to read the second and third book, but I'm not in any particular rush to do so. I do think that it is a book that if you like classic fantasy, if you're looking for something cozy and something that is going to feel almost comforting to read, then I think that this would be a really good choice. If you are someone who wants more character nuance, who wants a kind of a more in-depth exploration, then this might not be the book for you. But in terms of whether I think this book is overrated, just from a booktube perspective, because I feel like this is one that I always hear is phenomenal, fantastic, it certainly didn't live up to that standard for me, but I can understand why people would love it. And I definitely don't think that if you picked it up that you would have a bad time. I would find it hard to believe that people would absolutely detest this book, just because there's so much of what is fun about fantasy inside. I'm glad that I read it, and like I said, I will go on to read the others sometime in the future. But if you read this book with the read-along, then please let me know what you thought about it. If you have read it before, then let me know. And if it's on your TBR, do you think that it is something that you are going to enjoy, that it might be a new favorite for you? I would love to hear your thoughts, and I will see you with another video soon. Bye!